Welcome home to Passionate Justice 82 for the week of 6/6/15. Thank you all for your continuing growing support. Reach out to me on Twitter at jwolf41387 for all Passionate Justice news releases, podcasts. I ask all of you follow the show at jwolf41387 on Twitter. And now, a new hour, personal notes, super guest writers spurring you on every week, every day, a challenge to create a little more justice in our world. And yeah, join Our Salon, the very best readers and writers site on the net, growing and hosted by California's Lori Wright, and it's free. Join now at www.oursalon.ning.com, oursalon.ning.com. I am author activist Jonathan Wolfman, the spark for these stories. Passionate Justice, a progressive memoir and essays available at Amazon, and I'm so proud to say underwriting for Passionate Justice this year comes from Bud Clayman and OC87 Productions, producers of OC87RecoveryDiaries.com, and the feature-length film OC87, the obsessive-compulsive major depression bipolar Asperger's movie. Sometime soon, you must check out OC87RecoveryDiaries.com. Now, here's a question for you. Ever wonder what happens to animals during something like the West African Ebola crisis? We open today with a poignant piece, continuing on our animal cruelty theme from last week, from writer Wayne Pacelle. Last week, you'll recall, we called on Craigslist to stop making it so damned simple for bad people to get animals through the site, animals ripe for abuse of every kind, including eating. Here's a story from overseas, but one that strikes us right here in the U.S. Mr. Pacelle tells us that the New York Blood Center, it really has no heart. It's abandoned a colony of 66 chimps in Liberia that its research teams used in experiments for how long? For 30 years. Their care, their survival has now been dumped, foisted on the Humane Society of the United States and other caring groups and individuals picking up the pieces in a distant, beleaguered nation gripped in recent months by the Ebola crisis. This is a story of past exploitation, present-day heartlessness by a well-funded charity with ample resources to handle a responsibility it created and must not now abandon. Since the Blood Center cut off funds on March 6, the Humane Society and the Arcus Foundation have been providing support to keep the chimps alive. Dozens of volunteers in Liberia and neighboring countries have answered the call, putting their lives at risk to help the chimps. The crisis, when did it begin? It began a few months ago when a former chimp caregiver sounded an alarm. The Blood Center was terminating all funding for the care of the chimps it used for decades in medical research for its financial benefit. A team of researchers on the ground in Liberia helping humans during the Ebola crisis stepped in to make sure that the chimps, including several infants, didn't die from dehydration or starvation. The Humane Society was alerted in mid-March and has been working since with a small group of dedicated individuals to respond. The Humane Society of the U.S., along with the International, has set up emergency funding to pay for food and water for the animals who live on 6 islands and are entirely dependent on human care. There's a long history behind these individuals who have endured so much. In the mid-'70s, the Blood Center captured some of them from the wild, obtained others from pet owners, and set out to use them for research involving the Hep B vaccine and blood cleansing, among other topics. And these hapless creatures have also endured and survived protracted civil war in that country. In Liberia, going weeks at a time without food, water. Many died from dehydration and starvation, or They were killed by rogue militias time after time. Caregivers risked their lives to go out to feed the chimps, at times attracting fire from militant bands. So the story isn't just about the chimps, but also about the caregivers who've sacrificed so much and have been volunteering to take care of the animals since the blood center left them in peril. It is shocking. It is disgraceful that the blood center here in the U.S. chose to deliver this blow during the largest Ebola outbreak in history, a calamity from which the government of Liberia is as yet reeling, adding a burden to a nation strapped with a human crisis of, here in the U.S., unimaginably immense proportions. See, look, the New York Blood Center had previously committed itself to the lifetime care of these chimps, its officials publicly announcing their ethical responsibility to do that and indicating the start of an endowment for the purpose a decade ago. Officials there now are repudiating that commitment, stating heartlessly that the organization had never any obligation, contractual or otherwise. Oh, yes, it did. The Humane Society hired an expert from the Senagayong Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Cameroon to conduct an assessment. She worked with the caregivers over 2 weeks, including the repair of the water system. Prior to this, chimps were handed cups of water by the caregivers every other day. She implemented change in their diet, introducing the animals to new foods for the first time. There are plans underway to increase feedings to at least once a day at least, including arrangements for purchase of a boat engine in order to do it. We are thankful, we are thankful that Arcus Foundation has committed emergency funding to help. It's been a key player in stepping in whenever and wherever great apes are in peril, but you can help too. You can be a volunteer of America, as we say here on Passionate Justice. Let the New York Blood Center officials know that they need to keep their obligation to secure the chimps' future. Now, the good news is this. Hundreds of compassionate people have stepped up to support a new crowdfunding effort to provide for these chimps. Since the New York Times published about this, people have committed well over $10,000 to support the chimps' immediate needs, and you can too. Here's where I want you to go. Volunteers of America, go to www.gofundme.com/abandonedchimps. www.gofundme.com/abandonedchimps. You know, last week, for the first time, Passionate Justice presented in tandem a bicycle built for two, a literary bicycle built for two. Gloria and Lou Caviglia of New York, a wife and husband team, shared two terrific pieces. Lou's poignant Vietnam War memory, I hope you'll remember, and also remember, please, Gloria's subversive in-church piece, Shake Your Bonbon. God, what a name that is. What a title. Today, I'm delighted to present another couple from Philadelphia this time, a writer and an artist, Roberta Lee, and her husband, a school chum of mine from our earliest years, now writer and attorney, Michael Sheckman. Michael shares a practical approach. We'll hear from Michael and then from Roberta. Michael shares a practical approach to family justice here. You know, justice isn't just pie in the sky. It's not all theoretical. It's with us continually. As Michael says here in Without a Will, there really is no way. We've all heard or used the expression where there's a will, there is a way, but what is it or doesn't it mean when it comes to estates and estate planning? All of this was most recently brought to mind by the recent Amtrak fatal train derailment in Philadelphia, my hometown. I'm a second-generation Philadelphia lawyer, my son being the third-generation Philadelphia lawyer. In my family, I'm a general practitioner who does estate planning and administration. When I first started practicing law 39 years ago, estate planning consisted of wills and trusts used to distribute assets upon death and to have assets placed in trust for minors or incapacitated individuals, and this is to be done upon the death of the testator and or decedent. Nowadays, lawyers and their clients need to consider, along with wills and trusts, an advance directive or living will, as well as possibly a power of attorney should the client become disabled or just need help managing his or her affairs. In addition, we must now consider addressing social justice in connection with social media. Over the last year, I've received birthday notices on Facebook for friends or acquaintances who have passed away over the last year or so. In this day and age, it certainly seems appropriate that all adults, even our children in their 20s and 30s, should consider estate planning, and in so doing, make arrangements regarding their accounts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other social media applications that connect our lives to one another. Those who died tragically in Philadelphia on May 9 included a midshipman from the U.S. Naval Academy who had yet to reach 21, and the 39-year-old CEO, of an internet startup left behind a husband and a 2-year-old child. Now, many of us don't even consider estate planning until we have children or approach retirement age. I suggest that to achieve social justice in the handling of your personal affairs, especially in the event of an untimely and early death, we all consider getting ahead of the curve. Here in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure in many other states, if you die without a will, then the laws of intestacy will dictate who gets your property. This generally includes a spouse, children, parents, siblings, etc. So if you don't want your state laws to determine who gets what when you die, I urge you to see a lawyer who has knowledge in this area. Please remember to make provisions for the care and control of all of your assets, including social media accounts. It is never too early to engage in estate planning, including an advance directive or living will, as well as a power of attorney should the need arise. Where there is a will, there is a way, and you will have provided a proper, just path. Thank you, Michael A. Schechtman, writer and attorney. And yeah, family law justice, it is a complex whole. Yes. And here is Roberta Lee on a topic I'm guessing you haven't thought about in some time. Well, maybe you have, but dig this. Roberta calls this art is a stick in the eye of the beholder. 2 years ago, my husband spent several days in Thomas Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. We live in Cheltenham, a first-tier suburb, a half-hour north of the hospital. It's an easy drive, most of it on Broad Street, so I had ample opportunity to pass one of my favorite iconic landmarks, the historic, currently derelict, allegedly haunted Divine Lorraine Hotel. It was built between 1892 and 1894, originally serving as a luxury apartment for some of Philadelphia's wealthiest hoi polloi, and named the Lorraine. In 1948, under the ownership of Father Divine, it became the first hotel in Philadelphia to be racially integrated. Thus, the renaming to Divine Lorraine Hotel, or Divine Lorraine Hote, as one of its signs currently reads, it being short an L. The building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places for its significance in architectural and civil rights history, but it's been closed since 1999, and its marble floors, walnut paneling, and other architectural details were sold to salvage companies. The building's now a towering arched windows boarded up, its shell covered in graffiti, elegantly arched windows boarded up, filled roughly with cinder blocks or open to Mother Nature, and intrepid humans willing to somehow navigate an 8-foot-high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire to scale its base. Thousands drive by it every day. I imagine few see the beauty it's maintained, and fewer still see the current state as anything other than ugly. I'm guessing many sentences that include the name Divine Lorraine also include the words eyesore. It's the graffiti that seems to offend the most, yet it's the graffiti that bothers me the least. It's not my absolute favorite Philadelphia graffiti, but it features two installations of remarkably energetic, eye-popping design. They're on the roof, for one thing, and they're huge. One side reads, Eagles. The other side is not readily deciphered, but equally compelling. At 10 stories from the ground, the how of it conjures truly scary scenarios, all involving nasty potential consequences. The Divine Lorraine occupies a chunk of real estate that slid from trendy to trashy during its 123 years and is presently on the cusp of a much-hyped yet so far unperceivable renewal. Many people would love to see it restored to use, if not to its full former glory, and I'm among them. I will not lament the graffiti should it disappear. In other words, art can be ephemeral. It can certainly also be distinctly in the eye of the beholder, or in the case of graffiti, a stick in the eye of some beholders. I like some of it a lot. You don't have to like any of it. You don't even have to like the idea of it, and it is still art. Why? Why is it art? Because someone set out to do it and then did it. Their motivations, their level of training, whether or not they were paid, and the fact that no committee put it to a vote or expert pre-approved it is meaningless. How or if it affects your property value is obviously a question that has meaning for you, yet ultimately not for art. Art is self-expression. It's the making of a thing where no thing previously was, whether it's a piece of music or writing, a dance, or gigantic swirly letters painted on the roof of a cool old building that will probably be the first thing to go when the Divine Lorraine's oft-threatened resurrection finally takes place. Philadelphia is a city with a vibrant mural program. It's also a city with a vibrant graffiti program. One is publicly funded. One is publicly reviled. They exist side by side, often quite literally on the same surface. Who decides which is fun or inspiring or beautiful is up to only one person, you. But no matter what your decision, they both remain art. And I'll say here, as I thank Roberta heartily, that 35 years back when Tamar and I lived in Philly, she had her batik studio, her Fairmount Avenue art studio, a wine bottle cork's short hurl from the old as yet magnificent Divine Lorraine, and no one has put into words the amalgam of feelings and social justice issues, all truly sentient Philly people singing the old place, singing in graffiti, quite like Roberta Lee has here. Now, from our Bronx friend, Essays on the Bus writer, and so much more, Anne Bourne, who's just returned from some fascinating and gritty Spanish travel, here's her new piece, What is Breakfast Like on the Way to the Abbey? I'm spending a week volunteering at the restoration of a 12th century fortress on the Camino de Santiago just outside Pamplona in the magnificent countryside of Navarre. I greet passing pilgrims who walk by while the new owner of the property works on the project. They're on their way to Santiago de Compostela in far-off Galicia, while he works to create a moment's refuge for them here. I'm staying in Pamplona at a regular hotel, not an auberge or pilgrim's hostel. Since the hotel does not serve breakfast until 7, I wander out each day with my camera and my little day pack, my bottle of water filled in my iPad, to go to the only cafe I've found that's open at that hour, the Taberna on Carlos III. This minute cafe with 3 tables is part of a chain of small restaurant cafes. There's a refrigerated case with hams, cheeses, some yogurt, some sodas. The rest is bakery. Every day I show up around 6:30, 6:40, get my coffee, my juice, my toast. While I'm having breakfast, they make me a sandwich so I have something to take for lunch. The juice is made in a large silver contraption that funnels oranges down 2 chutes to be pressed into an aluminum pitcher, then ceremoniously poured into my glass. Typically, I like a croissant a la plancha, toasted on a press. But here, they drizzle it with honey, and it's just too sweet for this hour of the morning, so I opt for French bread toasted with a little butter. I used to be a cafe con leche gal, but last December, my daughter turned me on to cortado. It's the rough equivalent of a cafe con leche if you used only half the leche, and really great. Since there's so little milk, it's not so sweet as a cafe con leche, and I like to think it gives me tremendous credibility with the locals when I order it. The locals. This is the spot for the locals, even though it's on one of the main drags, because there's no tourists up at this hour, and the Camino does not go by the place. In theory, I would guess it's mostly people on their way to work or open the shops and banks, but in practice, it's more of a lesson in Spain. When I go there this morning, a few minutes earlier than usual this week, I had to ask the woman behind the counter, "Where's the vieja? Where's the old lady?" It was the first time this week I hadn't seen the maroon woman, and in typical New York fashion, because I didn't see her, I started to worry about her. A maroon woman is roughly my age, I would guess, maybe slightly older, who's worn the exact same outfit every single day, having breakfast here every single day, but eating something different every single day. She's boxy with a maroon knit jacket, a maroon knit skirt, and a maroon patterned T-shirt. She has white stitched loafers and hair. Her hair needs introduction to a comb at the very least. She says barely a word past the order to the counter woman. She comes, she eats, she leaves. I guess because by the time I have finished and packed up my lunch, she's also finished eating, but it's still there. There's a young girl, too, who gets her breakfast there. She, too, wears the same clothing every day, and I've not focused on what she orders because I'm fascinated that a 30-something would not be more fashion-conscious, but clothes are expensive, and no one cares that she has the same leather jacket, the same cream cardigan, the same jeans, the same suede boots. In so many ways, she's like Maroon Woman. A late 40s woman comes in last. She wears her gray hair up over her right ear, caught by a single bobby pin. She wears the same shoes, same coat, carries the same bag, and only once did she take a table to sit with another woman. The last of the regulars might be the manager. He's a very good-looking man in early 40s, and he takes a copy of each newspaper to place it on a wooden dowel that goes into a display so people can read with their cortados. Then I pick up my sandwich and my Aquarius, which is a kind of a flat, lifeless lemonade that I love, and I take off. I can only imagine the conversations about me after I leave. Now, you can see so much more of our friend Ann Bourne's work at, among other venues, thebroadside.com. Ann Bourne. Really going to switch it up. From a holiday to volunteer at an abbey in Spain to this. Did you know that Satanists plan to use the court's decision in Hobby Lobby to block pro-life propaganda? Here's a real instance of unintended consequences. In a statement, the Satanic Temple said that it will use the Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision to exempt its believers from state-mandated informed consent laws that require women considering abortions to read so-called pro-life material. Informed consent or right-to-know laws, you know what they do. They state that women seeking elective abortions be provided with information about alternatives to the procedure, often couched in language that attempts to personify a fetus to give it the status and sensibility of a person. The reproductive health people at the terrific Guttmacher Institute say that 35 states currently have informed consent laws, and of those, 33 require that the woman be told of the gestational age of the fetus. Far too often, that information consists of pro-life propaganda that disingenuously links abortion to higher breast and ovarian cancer rates. Can you believe that? Yeah, I can. I think they'd say anything. Or discuss so-called post-abortion syndrome, an alleged mental health condition. Well, it's not recognized by any medical or psych organization, not one. Because the Satanic Temple bases its belief regarding health, regarding personal health, on the best scientific understanding in the world, regardless of the religious or political beliefs of others, it claims that state-mandated info with no basis in scientific fact, well, that violates its religious beliefs, and they're making this available to all women. All women. And it has set up a website, www.thesatanictemple.com/campaigns/medical info, where women seeking an abortion can print out a letter for their healthcare provider explaining why she's exempt from the informed consent mandates. The letter reads, "All women who share our deeply held belief that their personal choices should be made with access to the best available information, undiluted by biased or false statements, are free to seek protection with this exemption, whether or not they're members of the Satanic Temple." You know, I will love to consider how the misogynists' lobby supporters respond to this. Now, from HuffPo, you're going to find fascinating, and you may wish to take notes, and you'll soon see why. You and I know that the media is continually criticized for being too liberal. Well, here's one newspaper's honest answers to the question, why do you support such a liberal agenda? And it's from North Carolina, the Charlotte Observer. They were asked, why do you support, by a lot of people, such a liberal agenda? And you know that recently, in recent years, North Carolina has been taken over by very, very conservative politicians. And it's very easy, to say, well, we're not liberal if you're asked, why do you support a liberal agenda? But instead, the Observer did not. They wrote this: "We believe everyone's created equal. We believe children should not bear responsibility for the sins of their parents. We believe people should be treated as equal, not lesser citizens, not with fewer rights because of race or for whom they love. We believe discrimination is wrong in every instance. We believe police officers should act professionally even under incredibly difficult circumstances, regardless of a suspect's race. We believe taxes should be kept as low as possible while still providing a sound safety net for the neediest, a robust education for everyone, decent health care for the elderly and the destitute. We believe there are people of worth beyond our own tight circles. We believe there are valuable neighborhoods beyond our own with different histories, perspectives, needs. We believe in the separation of church and state, and we believe if you're a fan of a politician solely or largely because he or she's got a D or an R after the name, you're not paying attention. We believe we've only one planet. We've got to leave it for our grandchildren. So, what do you think? Now, we return to Texas writer Diana Finfrock Farah, a third excerpt, our third and final excerpt from her recent novel, Door of the Heart, available on Amazon. You'll recall that in earlier excerpts, Diana introduced us to several poignant characters having unexpectedly to come to grips with homosexuality in school and friendship and neighborhood contexts. In excerpt 3, well, she says this: "Father Blair sat back and closed his eyes. As iron sharpens iron, so no person, one person sharpens another." Proverbs 27:17. He smiled gently at Tammy. "That's always been one of my favorite scriptures. Reminds me that we help grow one another through our encouragement, compassion, and guidance, but that God can use adverse situations too if we allow them to teach us, and if we allow God to work in us, I guess I just have trouble accepting the way some people continually create these adverse situations, Father. Sometimes I just want to scream. People say they're Christian, yet they still judge and choose hate. Isn't being Christian about loving your fellow man? Isn't it about not judging? So many of the callers we get here have been persecuted by fellow Christians, and that really angers me. I don't like seeing Christianity being used as a weapon against others. That just goes against everything I've ever known and believed in. Well, here's what I know about people who judge others, Tammy. They have convinced themselves that they know everything, therefore their purpose in life is to criticize those who think differently, and they frequently use the Bible as their fallback, because who would question the Word of God, right? And his eyes twinkled conspiratorially. Tammy nodded her agreement. She could listen to him for hours. Parents wrap themselves in the Bible while kicking their children to the curb. You're right, it's a mockery of Jesus' message of love and inclusion. He leaned in closer, and his voice took on a more intimate tone. Tammy, if you're dismayed by an injustice that you witness and you let the perpetrator know it, you're merely stating a fact and standing up for what's right, but there's a big difference between identifying an injustice and judging someone because of it. His eyes smiled, and his smile crinkled into a gentle empathy, and that's a trap that we as advocates must be especially careful to avoid. Well, that's a lot easier said than done. Tammy was aware that she was already perilously close to crossing that line. Oh, believe me, I know, Father Blair sat back and reverted to a more didactic style, but you know, we Christians make an even bigger mistake when, in attempting to be non-judging, we choose to stand by and say nothing when we witness mistreatment. In the first scenario, we only hurt ourselves in that we become what we're railing against, but in the second scenario, we are complicit in hurting both the perpetrator and his victim. Tammy thought a minute about what he had just said. She understood complicity in the crime against the victim. That was easy, and she had heard it many times. But hurting the perpetrator? And suddenly it became clear. Isn't that sharpening thing from Proverbs again, isn't it? Exactly. Those who judge not only cloak themselves in piety, they take our silence as agreement, and that encourages and empowers their continued malfeasance. If their unjust behavior is not questioned or challenged, they see no reason to change, and that keeps them from growing into all they could be, all that God wants them to be. He held both hands in the air. It takes both, speaking up for justice and refraining from judging those whose words, decisions, actions are unjust. That's our truth and the tightrope we must walk. Well, you know, it's been such a pleasure being privileged to sharing with you these excerpts from Diana Finfrock Farah's new novel, The Door of the Heart. And again, I want you to go find it on Amazon. Now, have you wondered where the term liberation theology has gone? Where has liberation gone? Okay, you don't need to hear me sing, but you know the left-inspired, some would say the Jewish prophetic tradition and Jesus-inspired Christian emphasis on the poor and social justice. Well, Nathan Gartels, editor-in-chief of the World Post, recently spoke to the resurrection of liberation theology by Pope Francis without Marxism. Gartels suggests that if communism is the God that failed, as it's often been called, Christian liberation theology is the gospel that has succeeded. Marx may be dead, but the cause of the poor and oppressed has been resurrected by the Argentine Pope Francis, most powerfully when he recently beatified Oscar Romero, reversing decades of conservative opposition in the church hierarchy and setting the El Salvadoran archbishop on the road to sainthood. Romero was gunned down at the altar in 1980 by a right-wing death squad that regarded him as a dangerous Marxist because of his activism on behalf of the poor, for no other reason. You must trust me when I say it was for no other reason. Archbishop Romero is an exemplar for Pope Francis. Both are orthodox and yet utterly radical. Romero was a priest whose life stands in testament to the kind of Catholicism preferred by a pope who declared within days of his election that he wanted a poor church for the poor. Illustrated with striking street murals, even a gang leader there says El Salvador still has lots to learn from the example of the martyred archbishop. And Pope Francis has spoken to the plight of refugees recently fleeing across the Mediterranean to Europe, or from the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq, especially Christians. And this week, Asia became a Pope Francis focus, where thousands of Muslim Rohingya sect people have fled persecution. In predominantly Buddhist Myanmar, they're desperately seeking refuge. You see, writers see parallels with, you'll remember, we called them the boat people. Remember, we called them the boat people after the end of the wars in Vietnam and Cambodia in the 70s. And this Pope joined calls on Asian nations to embrace an emergency response similar to the European Union's for the Mediterranean. You know, if caring for the poor and disenfranchised, who Jesus called the least among us, if that isn't what any religion or ethics supposed to embrace, well, I really can't imagine what it's for. What strikes me as the essential Judaism in the message of Jesus is his saying in his friend Matthew's earshot, what you do for the least of us, you do for me. Now, when I was a teacher and an administrator, half my time in public high schools, I often chose to sit at lunch with special ed kids. I enjoyed it, as I've mentioned here on occasion, and I've mentioned too that Tamar is an artist and social worker who works with multiply handicapped adults. She's incredible. So you'll dig when coming across what I'm going to tell you now. You'll understand how this affected me. Writer Faith Gardner in Daily Kos tells of a Utah high school that decided not to include special needs kids in its 2015 yearbook. You think I'm kidding? You think I'm kidding? Ms. Gardner writes this. This year, Leslie Bailey was stunned when she saw that her daughter Amber wasn't included in the Blue Peak High School yearbook as she had been in recent years and in all the past years. Amber has Down syndrome and takes classes in the Utah High School. For the last years, the school's always included the 17 special needs kids in the yearbook. However, a change was made this year. They've been told that they're not going to be in the yearbook this year. I mean, they've walked the halls with the other kids. How would you feel if it was your child? You know, your child was left out. As the principal told me, oh, we just don't have the pages. Uh-huh. You believe that, people, and I have a cure for cancer and crotch crabs to sell you. Parent Leslie Bailey says the move just serves to single out her daughter in such a terrible way and other special needs students from the rest of the student body. Ms. Bailey says, it bothers me, she says this, it bothers me because it seems they've gone back in time and we are going to tuck them away and say, no, these kids just don't exist. So let me ask you, do you know of another public school doing something so needlessly cruel to special needs kids? Write me at jonathanwolfman01@gmail.com, and we'll expose it for what it is, cruel discrimination, and we'll shame schools who treat kids so miserably, and we'll shame them and help them perhaps too into changing policy, because they can go choke on their dismissiveness. And talk about worst practices in education. Maybe there ought to be a Nobel Prize for this. You hear what happened to students at Valencia College in Florida? They were, oh yes they were, forced to undergo vaginal probes in the classroom. Our Daily Kos friend Jen Hayden tells us that students at Valencia are suing, claiming they were forced to undergo transvaginal probes in front of their classmates as part of their instruction in a medical diagnostic sonography program. Valencia positioned these transvaginal probes as voluntary, but its actual policy and practice was that they were not voluntary. That, according to the lawsuit. The suit also describes weekly probes for students in the program, saying they endured these invasive probes without a modicum of privacy. Plaintiffs would disrobe in a restroom, drape themselves in towels, and traverse the sonography classroom in full view of instructors and other students. A student would place a condom over the probe and then apply generous amounts of lubrication to the probe. In some cases, the students would have to sexually stimulate plaintiffs in order to facilitate inserting the probes into plaintiffs' vaginas. That's what the lawsuit further alleges. Again, billed as voluntary. Students say, nope. Because when students expressed concern to the program chair, she told them they could find another school. Quote, "We could find another school if we did not wish to be probed." That's what the suit says. And the college's instructors retaliated against them by saying they would reduce their grades, they would blacklist them within the medical community, they would not be able to get a job. So, as you can imagine, with allegations this serious and a lawsuit in motion, teachers and admins are the ones who will face a very public probe now. I want to preview something for you. As we're about to wrap for the day, I want to say that next week it is going to be my treat to share with you writing from Philadelphia writer Simone Zelich. Simone was one of my earliest students, and now she's professor of writing at the Community College of Philadelphia. It's a school that has, as does Miss Zelich, a very special hold on my heart for reasons I will share next week. You will love Simone Zelich's prose. So wrapping today, 2 quick stories. True stories. True stories. First, I call this I Do. When her doc says no knee sprain, she says, let's do Il Panito, Wednesday, nobody there, chicken piccata, mussels, wine. Okay. Well, you're in some mood. Doc says no sprain, be happy. Well, there'll be some whiny couple. No, Wednesday, it's midweek. Yes. And yes, there sure is. Midway through deliciously lonely garlic mussels they show, and sure, whiny, she says, why is it so hot? Why is it cooler outside? Why is it so hot? Why? I stare at the brown-haired woman in the green floral top, and then more, whys? Husband, now weatherman, no, Marcia, not too warm, Marcia, storm coming, Marcia, you're just fine, just fine, just fine. Static, Marcia, static. So warm, why is it so warm? I hold aloft iced, unsweetened, frozen carafe, iced tea. My teeth say evenly, if she whines or he condescends, just one more time, once more, this carafe's down their backs. Oh, no, you will not. Oh, yes, I sure will. And she does, and he does, and I do. And, maybe there is karma because just last week I was kidnapped. I do is from several years back and maybe slightly embellished, but maybe there is karma because just last week I was kidnapped. In the seating area, I next to a woman's dressing room, she deep within that sanctum whose border no man with hope of longevity may cross. Time tolls, time tolls. It tolls. I am reduced after texting May Christmas greetings to a dozen random phone numbers to posing for nauseatingly candy smile selfies, a hideously narcissistic display. At the tolling of time beyond which I believe I will have to eat my Nokia, fantasize to actualize a choking out on the bits, I wave over a woman with a tag. She looks at my wheelchair, my pleasant face, my gnawed and selfied Nokia. I say, could you please phone the FBI? I have been kidnapped. Thank you. She moves toward the counter and the house phone. Those are my stories, and I'll stick with them. So I want you to think on your stories, your essays, your poems. Let passionate justice give them added, broadened life. Send them to me at Jonathan Wolfman 01, Jonathan Wolfman 01 at gmail.com, and follow the program on Twitter at jwolf41387. You have so much more. You have passionate justice all the while. You keep trying to live as if justice matters, as if what your kids and what you do, you see, it matters. Be creative, courageous. Take your place on that great mandala. Because this is our brief moment of time. Phil Ochs, that troubled man, that great man, that marvelous singer, that marvelous songwriter, Phil Ochs said, I guess I'll have to do it while I'm here. He was so very right. I want you to go repair this crazy place. Promise. Because, you see, I promise, when you act on justice's behalf, it pays back. And it will most definitely make you happy. And watch for our 83rd Passionate Justice. And follow this show on Twitter at jwolf41387. Why? Why? Because there and everywhere it's passionate justice.